I'm Steve Tucker, the producer of the event today, and I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. As you all know, we're using the Zoom webinar platform, so only the host and experts will be on video. If you would like to make comments or ask a question, you can type it in the chat box below. Take a moment to identify where it is on your screen. If you're on an iPad, it's in a different location than it might be on a desktop. This session is being recorded and will be available to watch and share this week. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to the Aspen Brain Institute's founder and president, Glenda Greenwald.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. Hello to people all over the United States. We just found out that we have people listening in today from 46 countries in the US, and people in 79 foreign countries have looked in and registered for this series. So we're really excited. We're offering this free series and hoping this series will be the foundation of building a global online community focused on brain health. Our objective is not simply to reach a lot of people, but to help a lot of people. We'd like to thank Lugano Diamonds for their generous support as our national underwriter. And we thank them for choosing Aspen Brain Institute as a nonprofit worthy of their support and their values, and for making our Zoom expert series free to the public and able to be viewed worldwide. It's really working so well, and thank you to Lugano Diamonds. We also thank Alpine Bank for their generous support over many years now. They are the best community bank in Aspen. They really support the community. And thanks to our friends at Brain Futures, which is translating science to advance human potential, and to our friends at the American Federation for Research on Aging, all very important supporters for us. First, I'd like to tell you 2 minutes about Aspen Brain Institute, and then quickly get to our exciting speaker, Dr. Annie Fenn. So, at the Aspen Brain Institute, we're dedicating our lives to making sure that this is the last generation of 60 to 95-year-olds who are decimated by Alzheimer's and other dementias, of which there are no cures. At the Aspen Brain Institute, we believe this is one of the greatest global challenges of our time. With that in mind, our big aspirational goal, our real mission now, is to create a brain healthy planet. Nothing less will do. So in the time of COVID, we're producing this expert series of speakers free to the invited public. As I said, if I haven't said it before, over 2,000 from all over the US have signed up for the series. The purpose of the series is to increase brain health literacy and to share access to the top minds and evidence-based research on brain health. And here to help us with all that today is our next two speakers, mainly Dr. Annie Fenn, and then she will later be joined by Dr. Drew Ramsey, her good friend and colleague. Dr. Annie Fenn is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist who initially specialized in menopausal health. After practicing medicine for more than 20 years, she realized that helping people change what they eat was a more powerful health intervention than prescribing pills or doing procedures. She traded her stethoscope for an apron and returned to school to study culinary arts in Mexico, Italy, and the Culinary Institute of America. In 2015, Dr. Fenn founded the Brain Health Kitchen, an evidence-based online research about how and what to eat to resist cognitive decline. The Brain Health Kitchen Cooking School she founded in 2017 is the only school focused specifically on resisting Alzheimer's and other dementias. Students leave students learn which foods are the most neuroprotective, with which ones accelerate cognitive decline, and how to prepare foods using brain-healthy cooking techniques. Dr. Fenn also takes her cooking school abroad. She lectures frequently about the impact of lifestyle and diet on Alzheimer's, and she's a part of the Sempre Sano Wellness Retreat in Tuscany, Italy. Wouldn't we all love to attend that? And as a frequent visiting chef at Rancho La Puerta, the spa, and other diverse venues throughout the country. She's a real winner in our view, and I can't wait to hear what Annie has to say. So take it away, Annie, and show us all this beautiful food that you're going to show us how to make. Annie, please.
Thank you, Glenda. It's a huge honor to be speaking with you all today. And I'm really excited to share some of the latest science about what to eat and how it impacts your brain health. In particular, how to eat to slow down cognitive decline with age, and also specifically reduce your risk of Alzheimer's and other types of dementias. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides to share for you before the cooking demo. Can everybody see that okay? So our topic today is cooking in the Brain Health Kitchen. And I have a jam-packed agenda for you. We're going to talk a little bit about the science, and then we're going to go into my kitchen and I'm going to demonstrate a few of the dishes that I like to make in my cooking school. Now there's a huge body of literature now about how to feed your brain. And like Glenda was saying, I'm an OB/GYN physician, and I came to this field a little bit later in life. But ever since 2015, this field of medicine and science has been exploding with new data about how we should take care of our brains and how we can slow down the aging of our brains based on our environment, in particular, what we eat and what we choose to put into our bodies. This is the field of neuronutrition. So part of what I'm going to talk to you today with my slides, I'm going to show some of the science behind the recommendations that I make and why I use the ingredients that I do. We're going to talk about the 10 best food groups for your brain. I call these foods brain friendly because there are actually certain foods that possess neuroprotective ingredients that have been shown to slow down the aging of your brain. And likewise, there are 5 food groups to avoid. And these are the food groups that have been shown to accelerate brain aging. They're shown to cause neuroinflammation. These are the foods that you could have maybe sometimes, but it's not a good thing to have as a regular part of your diet. Glenda wanted me to say a few words about Brain Health Kitchen. You're probably wondering what an OB/GYN is doing, talking to you about brain health today and running a cooking school. I promise it all makes perfect sense. I did practice OB/GYN for 20 years in Jackson, Wyoming, where I live. And then in 2010, I decided to take a look at medicine through the lens of nutrition and lifestyle. And so that's when I went back to school and did some culinary training and went back to my community to teach cooking classes. I wanted to see how I could impact health in my community by teaching people how to eat better and cook more healthfully. By 2015, there was enough data about how to eat to prevent Alzheimer's that I decided to specifically focus on that. And that's why in 2017, I launched the cooking school. The cooking school is a website, it's a newsletter, it's a resource for everyone. It's also become a real community where I live. It's a community of people who are committed to taking care of themselves and taking care of their brains. It's a proactive approach to aging. And it's also part of the lifelong learning that we all recommend as part of Alzheimer's prevention and building cognitive reserve. And I also have to add that around the same time that I launched my cooking school, my own mother was diagnosed with dementia. And so I became even more committed to finding out how, like Glenda just said, we can make this generation age much better than maybe they have in the past by equipping you all with the tools that you need to keep your brains healthy for decades to come. So what is the science I look at in my Brain Health Kitchen curriculum? We don't have time to go over all of this today, but we will touch on the Mediterranean diet because it's very well studied as it pertains to brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. We'll talk about the MIND diet, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may not have. We won't talk about the finger study, but that's also a very important study out of Finland that looks at lifestyle interventions and cognitive health with age. I draw from the Blue Zones data, you know, the 5 places on Earth with the most centenarians. The Blue Zones can inform us what are the best ways to eat and what are the ingredients that are associated with longevity. And these centenarians in Blue Zones, you know, they don't have dementia. They're still working at the age of 100 and active and living full lives. I draw strongly on the data from Dr. Lisa Mosconi out of Weill Cornell. She is a neuroscientist who is studying the brain and how food impacts it. And she also is a specialist in Alzheimer's prevention. And there's hundreds of papers on this. Like I said, this is an area of research that is exploding. Nutrition research is getting much more, more like the medical literature we are used to. There's more randomized controlled trials. There's better epidemiological data. It's all getting much more rigorous, which means that we have a lot more information at our fingertips. So this is the Mediterranean diet pyramid. I'm sure all of you have seen this. I won't go into it in too much detail. When I was a busy doctor, I would keep a copy of this pyramid in my desk drawer. And when people would ask me at the end of the visit, oh, so Annie, what should I eat? I would hand them this. And that was the best I could do with my schedule and no time to talk about nutrition as physicians are so time crunched. But it turns out it wasn't bad advice. The Mediterranean diet, as you can see, is a plant-based diet. The whole bottom half of the pyramid is all types of plants. I like to say plant-rich because I think that sounds more delicious. So it's a plant-rich diet. Fish and seafood are prominent. And then there's chicken, eggs, butter, dairy products. And at the very top of the pyramid are meats and sweets. So what you will see when you think about how Americans have evolved to eat over the last several decades, if you take that Mediterranean diet pyramid and you flip it over, the bottom rung of our American period, sadly, is all meats and sweets. We consume an inordinate amount of sugar in our foods because a lot of our food is processed and it has added sugar. And there's also a lot of sugary drinks available. And drinking sugary drinks, whether it's with sugar or whether it's with artificial sweeteners, has been linked to not only dementia, but also stroke. So we're consuming a lot of meat, a lot of sugar. We don't do too well on seafood. The most popular seafood consumed in America is in the form of fried shrimp at a fast food restaurant. Likewise with chicken, fried chicken sandwiches is the #1 way Americans consume chicken. And when it comes to plants and vegetables, sometimes we don't do so well. So what does the data say about the Mediterranean diet? We do know that if you follow the Mediterranean diet, you will have 40% less Alzheimer's when you get older. You will have 30% less chance of getting a heart attack or a stroke. The Mediterranean diet has been proven to improve cognitive function over time. Cognitive function are the tests they do, such as processing speed and executive function and things of that sort. We now know, because of the SMILE study out of Australia, and I'm sure Dr. Ramsey will want to mention this more a little bit in the Q&A, but if you are being treated for anxiety or depression and you also are on a Mediterranean diet, you are 25% more likely to get better. We also know that if you are on the standard American diet, or whatever that version is for you, and you switch to a Mediterranean diet, after 3 years, we can see changes in brain MRI data to show that your biomarkers for Alzheimer's have gone down. And what do I mean by biomarkers? These are the things you can measure, such as a blood test, such as amyloid protein in the cerebrospinal fluid. And in this particular study, it was an MRI looking at amyloid and tau proteins. And if you look at the radiograph on the screen, this is the work of Dr. Lisa Mosconi. She has looked at over 400 brains in this one study, looking at what does a brain look like if you follow a Mediterranean diet, and what does it look like if you follow the standard American diet. And what she has found, and what's been replicated by other studies, is that your brain volume is twice that if you're following a Mediterranean diet than if you are following a Western diet. And why is this important? Well, brain volume, when it comes to brain health, is basically everything. It's the number of brain cells you have, it's the neurons, it's the number of synapses and the connections you have. As we get older, our brains do shrink. That's part of aging. It's called brain atrophy. But we don't want that to happen. We want to keep our brain volume robust throughout all of our decades. And they have been able to prove now with MRI data that a dietary pattern such as the Mediterranean diet can do just that. And this brings up a really important point that I want to share with you all. We used to think that Alzheimer's just happened when you got older, like when you were 70, you got diagnosed with it, it just happened. But now we know that Alzheimer's is actually a process that happens over decades, 20 to 30 years before the first memory lapse. Alzheimer's is now being thought of as a chronic illness at which the root cause is probably inflammation. And there's all sorts of inflammatory insults that we endure throughout life, but starting at midlife or early midlife, which I would say is 30s and 40s, these insults really start to accumulate in our brains, and researchers can see this now with MRIs, PET scan, and by looking at the cerebral spinal fluid. And these proteins accumulate throughout the course of our life. Now, I'm not telling you that like we're all getting Alzheimer's and this is just really depressing. I'm flipping it to say, if it takes decades for us to get Alzheimer's, we also have decades to keep our brains healthy and to avoid Alzheimer's. Amyloid protein and tau tangles are two of the proteins implicated in Alzheimer's disease. We know that certain foods that we eat can actually increase inflammation inside the brain, and that inflammation often results in the deposition of these proteins. So let's talk about the MIND diet study, M-I-N-D. This was published in 2015 in the Journal of Alzheimer's and Dementia. This is the work of Dr. Claire Morris and her group at Rush. And what they did was they looked at the Mediterranean diet, and Dr. Martha Claire had been studying nutritional epidemiology for over 20 years. And she said, what if we took the Mediterranean diet and made it even more specific for brain health? What if we had a brain healthy Mediterranean diet based on other data that we know, say about berries or leafy greens? And so they took that Mediterranean diet and they tweaked it, and they studied a group prospectively to see whether or not they got Alzheimer's. This is Dr. Martha Claire Morris on the left. She went to Jackson last year to do an event with me in a cooking class and shared a lot of this wisdom with us. So her study was over 900 participants. It's important to know that these people did not have dementia. These were people with healthy brains, middle class Chicago area residents, aged 58 to 98, and they were followed for 4.5 years. So I won't go into all the details of the study, but the most important thing you need to know is that the people that follow the MIND diet most detailed and specifically, they had 53% less Alzheimer's at the end of the 4.5 years. And that's remarkable. We don't have anything that can treat Alzheimer's, reduce the risk of Alzheimer's to this magnitude. There's no drug, there's no supplement, there's no lifestyle intervention. So 53% was remarkable. The other thing about the study that's remarkable is that the people that cheated on the diet, so they have a MIND diet score, and maybe they only followed it half the time. Maybe they only ate the brain healthy foods half the time, or ate too many of the brain unhealthy ones. They still had a 37% reduction in their Alzheimer's risk. And I think this is so important because people think that they have to make radical differences in their lifestyle to get health benefits. But this study shows that even small changes really mean a lot. In this case, people being half in on the MIND diet still enjoyed a 37% risk reduction. All groups enjoyed improved cognitive function, especially processing speed and short-term memory. Why is this important? That 53%, think about it, we are facing an epidemic of Alzheimer's in this country. In part, I think it is our diet, our lifestyle, but a huge factor of it is that our population is aging, and we have large numbers of people entering older age groups. Right now, there's 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. That is probably underreported. There are a lot of Alzheimer's patients who slip through the cracks. Women notoriously do well on Alzheimer's screening tests, even though they actually have impaired memory because the way the tests are designed. By 2050, it's expected there will be 14 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. So to put that in perspective, if you're 65 right now, you have a lifetime risk of 1 in 10 of getting Alzheimer's. And if you're 85, your risk is 1 in 2. Now this is men and women lumped together. So women are especially vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's victims are female. And there's a lot of research about this, but we don't have time to go into that today. But if you look at this number at the age of 65, if you're female, that risk is actually 1 in 6. And if you're male, the risk is 1 in 11. So when I look at the dietary interventions, which are actually not hard to do at all and include really delicious foods that I love to eat, and so does everyone I know, knocking down that number by 53% is substantial. So that's why this is important. So by now you probably want to know what are the 10 food groups for a healthy brain, right? These neuroprotective ones, the ones I call brain friendly, and what are the 5 groups to avoid. Are you ready? I'm going to go through this list a little more quickly, and I'll talk about some of these foods in detail during the cooking demo and during the Q&A as well. So no surprise here. The first brain healthy food group is berries, 2 or more half-cup servings a week. And also we have a link for you to an article I wrote that details all of these food groups and the amounts that are needed and recommended. So you can take notes if you want. That's a great way to remember the information, but we also have a link that will provide you this detailed as well. So what's so special about berries? Berries are rich in a type of flavonoid called anthocyanin. And anthocyanin are phytonutrients in the berries that actually are potent antioxidants in the brain. And in animal studies, have actually been shown to clear up amyloid plaque in the brain. And not all berries are the same. Some have more anthocyanin than others. You want to look for the dark purple, blue, black, and dark red berries. So these are huckleberries. If you're from Aspen or Jackson, where I live, you probably know these huckleberries. Wild berries are especially high in these antioxidants, but supermarket berries are great too. Leafy greens, 6 or more servings each week. 1 cup raw or half cup cooked. This is a picture of the Warm Kale Blackberry Salad we'll be making in a few minutes. And leafy greens we're taking as their own food group because there's so much data behind the fact that there are bioactive ingredients in leafy greens. Leafy greens, I mean kale, I mean collard, I mean arugula. I'm also talking about herbs here, like cilantro and parsley. They're rich in so many different nutrients that are important for brain health. So that's easy, right? We've got berries, we got basically a small salad. Vegetables, 1 or more 1 cup serving a day. Now, vegetables are their own food group in the brain healthy diet, the MIND diet. In the Mediterranean diet, you'll notice all these things are lumped together. This is why the MIND diet is more brain specific. It's telling you exactly how much and what of these ingredients that you need. And any of the vegetables count, but I love it when you choose colorful vegetables because the more pigments in the vegetables, the greater chance they will have phytonutrients that your brain can utilize for function and protection. And I also love the whole class of cruciferous vegetables. Those are the broccolis and the brassicas. Those are the cauliflowers and the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage. All of those foods are super good for your brain. Nuts, number 4. 5 servings, which is about 1/4 cup, a small handful each week. Now this is a picture of me making almond milk, and in the Brain Health Kitchen, I don't use a lot of dairy products. It's not that dairy is inherently bad, it's just that nut milks, creams, and the like, nut cheeses, are just better for you. Mainly because, number 1, they provide a lot of vitamin E, and we need vitamin E in a food form, not so much in a supplement, more in a whole food form for optimal brain function, for reduced inflammation in the brain, and for Alzheimer's protection. So there's vitamin E, there's lean protein, but the biggest thing about nuts is that they are packed with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So when you choose, say, almond milk at the grocery store over, your regular whole milk, cow's milk, whatever you like to drink, you're shifting the fat profile of your diet to a monounsaturated fat. And there's a lot of reasons why that's healthy. We can go into that more in the Q&A. Beans. You probably knew I was going to say this. Beans are very popular in the blue zones. It's actually one of the food groups that all blue zones, all 5 of them, even though they're in really far corners of the earth, everyone eats beans. And there's a lot of benefit to eating beans in your diet on a regular basis. Here, the recommendations are 3 or more half-cup servings a week. And that's cooked beans. So here's what beans can do for you. Not only do they provide phytonutrients, they also provide a lot of fiber. And the Brain Healthy diet is rich in fiber. That's because fiber in your foods will bind up cholesterol and keep it from entering into the bloodstream where it causes damage. There is a direct correlation between the LDL in your blood and your Alzheimer's risk. So beans can do that for you because of their fiber. They also have such a glycemic index, they lower the glucose that gets into your bloodstream as well. And hence they blunt the insulin response. So they're doing all these things for you just by being there, and they also provide phytonutrients. A lot of people come to my cooking school and they don't really love beans, and so I have some tricks around that. For example, I use chickpea flour a lot in my baking, and we do a lot of pureed bean dishes as well. Whole grains, 3 or more half-cup servings every day. Now this might surprise some people because there's been a lot of talk and data and books written about the fact that grains are bad for your brain. And I would agree with that statement, as it is in America. 97% of all the grains that Americans consume are in the form of all-purpose processed white flour, which is devoid of nutrients, devoid of fiber, and really hits your bloodstream just like sugar. So if we're consuming 97, 98% white flour, then yeah, grains, I put them in the same category as a sugary drink. I wouldn't go there. But whole grains, if you choose to eat grains, whole grains have a lot of benefit for you. Number one, they're inexpensive, they're really convenient, they provide a lot of vitamin E, and just like beans, they provide a lot of fiber to bind up LDL. They also will blunt your glucose and your insulin response so that you can have improved metabolic health. And I use grains lots of different ways in the Brain Health Kitchen. This is a breakfast bowl made with farro. I make the farro, which is basically a wheat berry, ahead of time in bulk. I do it in my Instant Pot, and then I freeze it in half-cup portions. And whenever I want a quick breakfast, I just defrost it, add almond milk, nuts, pistachios, berries. Makes for very, very easy morning porridge. Fish. You knew I was going to say fish, right? The Mind diet stipulates that the fish is not fried. Like I said, fried shrimp is pretty much the most popular fish in America. And they say 1 or more servings each week. Now this is interesting because the Mediterranean diet would like us to eat a lot more fish than this, right? 5 servings a week, which is really hard for Americans who don't have access to good quality seafood. But what they found in the Mind diet research was that there was no greater benefit in Alzheimer's prevention when you had more than 1 serving a week. Why that is, we're not exactly sure. Is it the mercury? Dr. Morris thinks probably not. And you can eat more fish if you want to. They just didn't find added benefit from 1 a week. And of course, fish, this is the black cod that we're gonna be making today in the fish packets. I'll be demoing this in a little bit. This is actually a really easy recipe, even though it looks fancy. Fish has a lot of things in it that are good for your cognitive health and your mental health, as Drew will underline in a few minutes. Number 1, it's the fat profile. Monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, rich in omega-3s, and particularly the omega-3s that our brain requires, like DHA and EPA. And fish is also rich in vitamin D, which we like to get in our foods as much as we possibly can. Poultry is number 8, again, not fried, 2 or more servings each week. Now you don't have to eat chicken or poultry to have a brain healthy diet, but if you do, you will get a lot of lutein and choline in your diet, which are brain healthy nutrients that you need. Number 9 is olive oil. I know you knew I was gonna say that. I'm notoriously a lover of great olive oils. I even named my puppy olive oil. The Mind diet says use olive oil as your primary cooking oil, as they do in the Mediterranean. And there's 2 reasons for this. I mean, why is olive oil so different than all the other cooking oils out there? I mean, there's other good oils too, like avocado oil, walnut oil, but olive oil is special. Number 1, it has the right fatty acid profile. Monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, very few saturated fats. But it also has something that other oils do not have, like polyphenols. is a high density of polyphenols. And these are basically nutrients that relieve oxidative stress in the brain, and they come from the olives. So I think of olive oil as olive juice. It's highly perishable. You want to be very careful where you buy it, how you store it, and how you cook with it. And we talk a lot about this in the cooking school. And the last of the brain healthy food groups is red wine. This is optional. You don't have to drink at all to have a brain healthy diet. Up to 5 ounces a day is the recommendation if you do drink red wine. Now this is a really interesting topic that we can cover more of in the Q&A, but it's very controversial. And actually the Mind Diet study is now a randomized placebo-controlled trial that is ongoing with results due out in 2021. And in this second phase of the Mind Diet trial, Dr. Morris and her team decided to take this out as a brain healthy food group. So now there's actually really only 9 brain healthy food groups. And the reason was Americans have a really hard time getting the dose right. There is data that shows if you drink up to 5 ounces of red wine a day, it actually is beneficial for cardiovascular and brain health. But if you drink more than that, it's a very fine line between being detrimental to your health. And she says it's very hard to track, it's very hard to explain, and Americans somehow just don't get it maybe as much as Europeans do. I don't know if that's true or not. Anyways, if you do drink red wine, keep it under 5 ounces a day. And no, you can't drink all of that on the weekend if you choose. Okay, let's go through the 5 food groups to avoid. I know you already probably have a feeling for what these are gonna be. Number 1 is fried and fast food, less than 1 serving a week. Why do you think that is? I mean, most of the inflammatory products in our food has to do with cooking oils. And a lot of the cooking oils in restaurants and fast food places are being reused. And when they get reused, they build up inflammatory substances. They're very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which we need as a nutrient and as a fat, but we don't need as much as we're getting in the American diet. So fried and fast food is sort of a recipe for disaster when it comes to brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. So the Mind Diet's not saying that you can't have this at all. You can't like never have a hamburger or a fried falafel. It's saying 1 or less a week. Okay. Number 2, red meat, less than 4 servings a week. And the serving size is 3 ounces, which by American standards is quite small. Number 3, butter and stick margarine, less than a tablespoon a day. And that might seem really austere, but what we're doing with the Mind Diet and the Mediterranean diet is we're cooking mostly with olive oil, and I bake with olive oil too. So I still use butter and I love butter, but I don't have as many instances in my kitchen to use it. And the Mind Diet, it's thought that part of its success comes from being very low in saturated fat. It's really less than 5% saturated fat. It's rich in the other fats, up to 40% mono and poly, but it's very low in saturated fat. And that's why these regulations seem a little strict. The next one I know you're not gonna love, but cheese, less than 1 ounce serving a week. That's actually changed in the second Mind Diet trial. They went up to 2 ounces, which is not a big difference. 1 ounce of cheese is like 1 inch cube. But again, trying to drive down our saturated fat intake is beneficial for our brain health. And the last one is pastries and sweets, less than 5 servings a week. So if I had to put it all on one slide, what is brain healthy food? It has a low glycemic index. That means it's low in sugar and high in fiber. It won't spike your blood sugar or your insulin levels. It's low in saturated fats. It's rich in mono and polyunsaturated fats. It's packed with antioxidants. It's plant rich. It's nutrient dense. And above all, it's not a diet. It's not a strict diet. It's not a prescriptive. It is a lifestyle, much like the Mediterranean lifestyle, where you look at what you eat through the lens of brain health. And you decide what's most important to you. Eating that food that you know has a lot of inflammatory substances in it, or choosing a more brain-friendly food that's gonna help your brain age better. I wanna highlight one more study that just came out last summer in JAMA. And as you know, what you eat is not a whole part of the story. It's also, there are other lifestyle factors we know that reduce Alzheimer's risk. Exercise, not smoking, building cognitive reserve, limiting alcohol intake. So this study very elegantly looked at all of those factors, and they found that if you put the brain healthy diet together with these other factors, they got even more Alzheimer's risk reduction out of it, 60%. And when they took out the participants in that study who had the Alzheimer's risk gene, ApoE4, they also had a reduced risk of 32%. So that means these lifestyle interventions are powerful, whether you have a family history or a genetic risk or not, by reducing our risk of Alzheimer's by as much as 60%. Some people say you can reduce it by as much as 90%. But right now in 2020, I think this is about as good as the data gets on risk reduction. So I have a couple of takeaways for you. After the presentation, we'll be emailing you some links, one of which is a one sheet of all my best kitchen tips. And on the other side of the piece of paper is a shopping list with boxes to check off and everything of brain healthy foods. It's not all the brain healthy foods, but it's the ones I cook with mostly. They're easy to find and are also the most delicious ones too. I also have put together a brain health kitchen guide to cooking oils, because I know how difficult it is to even choose a good olive oil. But there's so many oils out there that are being marketed to you to be healthy, good for your body, good for your brain. And in reality, most of them are anything but. So I have a table of that for you that we can send to you. And if you have questions about it, you can let me know. I also have a little bit of homework for you, because I don't have a lot of time to tell you everything I want you to know about protecting your brain from Alzheimer's. And we didn't get a chance to talk about the microbiome at all. And we know there's a big brain-gut connection, right? So one part of your homework is I want you to eat 30 different plant foods this week. And I want you to write them down. Make sure you're hitting 30 different types of plant foods this week. Because that one practice, not the writing it down, that'll help you do it, but the one practice of actually eating a variety of plants will help you cultivate a diverse microbiota in your gut microbiome, which will give you more plentiful neurotransmitters that will help your brain age better. Number two, I have a few things I would love for you to read. I want you to read up on brain resiliency. By looking at the Nun study, there's a book called Aging with Grace by David Snowden. And I want you to read about how some nuns, even though they all had the same lifestyle, some nuns got Alzheimer's and others didn't. And what was the difference between that? Why were some nuns' brains resilient to Alzheimer's and why were some not? Why were some nuns' brains riddled with amyloid plaque after they passed away and others were not? Number two, I want you to read Brain Food by Dr. Lisa Mosconi. Also Diet for the Mind by Dr. Martha Clara Morris, who has passed away just recently. But she left us a huge legacy of nutritional data that is immaculately done and some of the soundest advice on what to eat for your brain right now. And the next thing I want you to do is I want you to think about your diet. I want you to think about, well, most people do pretty well, honestly, with the brain healthy diet, but there may be things that you want to get rid of. There may be things that are problems that are inflammatory. So I want you to think about that. Think about the 3 things that you can do to improve your brain health with food, based on the things that I've told you. And I want you to write those down and email them to me at brainhealthkitchen@gmail.com. Okay, that's your homework. And I just want to remind you that Brain Health Kitchen is a website, a recipe blog. It's a resource of information for you. You can get good recipes there. You can also read about the latest studies. I do a brain health news update, usually quarterly, about all the studies that are coming in, what that means for your life. I have a free newsletter that I send out monthly that highlights this, as well as recipes. I have a cooking school that's based in Jackson, but I can bring that to you if you want to host an event. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Those are the Tetons where I live. So now, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, Glenda.
You're way over, but you got to do it quickly or we won't have any time for questions.
Okay. We're going to go over a few. We don't
Great, but we got to get to it. The
Yeah.
demo.
We're gonna go through a few of the favorite things I like to make in the Brain Health Kitchen. The first one is going to be Warm Kale Blackberry Salad. And I know a lot of people, maybe some people, don't really love kale. I know because I'm married to one of those people. So I've devised a lot of ways to make kale that's absolutely delicious. So first, I'm gonna go ahead and change my screen. And I need to change my background. And you're gonna pop into my kitchen.
There we go.
Are we there?
We're definitely in the kitchen. Looks good.
Welcome. And I'm going to move this a little bit so that we can see.
Great.
Technology. We're all getting better at technology, aren't we? All right. So the first thing we're going to make, dessert first, right? When I bake, I still eat things like brownies and cookies, but instead of butter, I tend to use olive oil. And I also use a lot of fruit purees like unsweetened applesauce instead of the sugar to cut that down. I use almond flour instead of white flour. There's lots of other flours I like to use too, but almond flour has a lot of vitamin E in it, especially if it's fresh. And I love cooking with cacao powder and dark chocolates because good quality chocolate is high in flavonols, which are really good for your brain. There's a study that just came out that pertained to how your brain really soaks up these flavonoids, and they're associated with a decreased risk of Alzheimer's if you eat a lot of foods with flavonoids in them. I'll be writing about that soon on my website. So what we're gonna do with our brownies, which has all of these high fiber, brain healthy ingredients in it, is we're gonna go ahead and make some tahini swirls. And I love tahini because number one, it's got a lot of those brain friendly fats I was telling you about. Number two, it is a seed, and so it also provides fiber and a lot of vitamin E, and also provides zinc. And it's really important to get zinc in your diet, I believe, because it is associated with resistance to viral infections. And that, of course, is super important. Nowadays, we're all trying to stay healthy and eat whole foods at home. So, and I also like the mix of savory and sweet that putting tahini in your brownies gives, because if you're eating sweets all the time, then you want things to be sweet a lot, if that makes sense. And if you start to train your palate, then not even a sweet is all that sweet anymore. That's sort of the reason for it. So we're just gonna go ahead and make some swirls in it. Normally I use a wooden skewer, but I don't have one right now. I didn't want to have to go to the store for it. And that's basically it. And in terms of salt, I do like to give a lot of my desserts a lot of salt. It accentuates the flavor of the chocolate because we're not using a lot of sugar. It just really, really brings out the flavor. Put that in the oven. And I'm going to show you how we made our fish packets. So we talked a lot about these brain healthy food groups and why fish is good for you. This is a type of fish that I really like. It's Atlantic cod. You can also get black cod. I also really love wild caught salmon. I like all the smash fishes for the omega-3 fatty acids. Smash are salmon, mackerel, anchovies, cod, herring, it's the sardines. So what I'm doing is marinating this cod, and I like to leave the skin on because a lot of those omega-3s are right under the skin. So if you strip your fish of the skin before you cook it, you're actually losing a lot of the beneficial fats. You can take it off later, you don't have to eat it. I would leave it in there while I'm cooking. So what we're gonna do is, I know that everyone's really tired of doing dishes because we've all been home a lot and we've been cooking all of our meals from scratch with very little going out. And so I created a meal that can all just go in a paper packet so that there are no dishes to do then. And I have some red quinoa here. I'm topping it with some zucchini noodles. And these are tossed with orange rind and lemon rind and a little bit of garlic. And then we have our fish, which we're putting skin side down. So those omega-3s, as it cooks, they'll seep down into the paper. And then I'm gonna go ahead and top it off with some blood oranges. Those anthocyanins I was telling you about that are in berries, they are also in dark red fruits like this. Blood oranges, grapefruit, things of that sort. I'm gonna add a little bit more of the marinade. And then this is a brain-friendly cooking technique because when you cook fish, you wanna cook it really gently. If you overcook the fish, you will lose up to half of the vitamin D and half of the omega-3s. So if you steam it in a packet like this, then you basically There's very little oil involved. There's a little bit of olive oil. Not overcooking it. You're not losing the nutrients. And the fish is flakier and a lot more delicious. All I'm doing is making what is sort of like a big calzone. And I'm going to put that in the oven for 15 minutes. And I'll show you how that looks because I made one before we went on. And you can make these packets ahead of time. A friend of mine just emailed me this morning and said she made 10 of them ahead of time over the weekend, and then she put them on the grill in foil, obviously. And so you can do it that way, so it's a good make-ahead dinner. And then when it's time to eat, you just need a plate and pass around some scissors. And voila, you have a little entree of fish, quinoa, zucchini, very filling. It's got a lot of fiber. It's got a lot of nutrients. I like to serve it with a cilantro chutney. This is cilantro, cashews, turmeric, which we can talk about in the Q&A if you like, a little bit of honey, and a little bit of jalapeno. So it's a little bit spicy. I like to serve it with that. And that's all you do. Should we go to the Q&A, Linda, or do you want me to do the salad as well?
Let's see, what do you have left to do? You've done it.
The kale salad, but it's easy. You basically throw kale in a pan with olive oil, and then you throw my favorite berry, the blackberry, because it's highest in anthocyanin of any of the supermarket berries. You toss pistachios, blackberries. Instead of making a salad dressing, you just add balsamic vinegar to the pan until it gets syrupy, and then the whole thing turns into a dressing.
That sounds wonderful.
It's really easy.
Annie, thank you so much. I didn't think you could get through that cooking demo so well and so quickly, but you are leaving us time for the questions. And I want to thank you so much, and then introduce your good friend and our new friend, Dr. Drew Ramsey, who's going to ask you some questions and have a bit of a discussion with you two brain health foodies. I want to just introduce Dr. Ramsey for a moment. Dr. Drew Ramsey, are we getting his photo up? Dr. Drew is a psychiatrist, author, and farmer. He is a clear voice in the mental health conversation and one of psychiatrists' leading proponents of using nutritional interventions above prescribing drugs. He's an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. He founded the Brain Food Clinic in New York City, offering treatment and consultation for depression, anxiety, and emotional wellness. His clinic incorporates evidence-based nutrition and integrative psychiatry treatments. He's using the latest in brain science and an array of delicious food. He recently launched a course, Eat to Beat Depression, which helps patients and families boost mood and their brain's nutrition. I now want to talk to these two brain health foodies, Dr. Drew Ramsey and the brilliant Dr. Annie Fenn. You two have a go at each other, and I think we're going to learn a lot. Drew, please come on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Ramsey. Glenda, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Annie, thank you so much for making me super hungry. And what does food have to do with mental health? Well, we're talking about brain health, and brain health is the foundation of mental health. And so as a psychiatrist, I just noticed we weren't talking to patients about food as one of those ways that we think of in terms of treating depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. And so I've just worked hard to apply the evidence that you saw a lot of it around the dementia evidence that Annie just presented. That evidence also applies to depression as well. And there's a mounting group of evidence, including some randomized trials, that diets like the Mediterranean diet really do play an important role potentially in the treatment and depression, treatment and prevention of illnesses like depression. And Annie, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask some questions And we have a few questions from the audience as well. And again, everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you and talk about your health and your mental health, especially right now as we are in such a crisis in terms of pushing ourselves to the limit in pandemic. Prior to all of the racial unrest and the death of George Floyd. And now I think there's just such a heaviness around everything. So, and so it's time for us all to be talking about and thinking about mental health. We often don't connect that to the kitchen. And so Dr. Fenn, this is all, thank you so much. There's a whole lot of information. And I'm wondering, when you meet with patients and people get this info and they get on board, they get on the brain food bus, what are some of the changes that you see people make that has a real impact? What are some of the really high yield foods? Because we get a lot of recommendations, the olive oil, the fishes, the wild berry, the dark berries, the greens, foods that you and I both love. But what are the ones that really you feel deliver the biggest bang for the buck in terms of your food prescriptions?
I would go straight to the first one in the brain unfriendly food group, and that would be to limit your fried and fast foods. And I would include this packaged foods as well. Because if you just eliminate a lot of the processed food that is in our diets, just everywhere, you will feel so much better. And like small changes, I noticed this when I was practicing OBGYN as well, small changes in your lifestyle beget greater changes. You stop eating packaged and processed food, you start cooking a little bit more healthfully from scratch. Maybe you just make one meal every couple of days, and that's all it is. You feel so much better when you do so that you want to start cooking more. And I really do believe some of this health starts in the kitchen, and that means eschewing a lot of the things that are marketed to us to be healthy when they're anything but.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And I don't know if everyone listening to that surprised you. You expect us brain foodie doctors to whip out, the salmon, the olive oil, right? But I think it's so important to emphasize that, so many people really need to focus on some of the foods that are driving inflammation and driving the diabetes epidemic. And they do creep up on you. I mean, I think the average American gains a pound and a half for every year after college graduation. And so, there's this creep that happens over time, just like Alzheimer's does in our physical health. It really does affect brain health. But yeah, getting rid of that stuff. Are there ways?
It doesn't have to be expensive. I think one of those mental health studies that you presented in Jackson showed that eating for brain health can be less expensive than actually eating the other way. My diet is full of beans and whole grains and leafy greens, and I'm not eating a lot of expensive foods all of the time. The majority I eat is inexpensive and easy to find.
I think it's also something a lot of us have noticed in quarantine, kind of what you need, what really lasts, what is of value and what isn't. Yes, the SMILES study, which you're referring to, which is the first, you referred to it a little earlier, this was the first clinical trial of the Mediterranean diet as an adjunct or an add-on treatment to the treatment of clinical depression. And those individuals who were in the trial and got the Mediterranean diet both had about 32% of them went into full remission of their depression, but also, as Annie alluded to, they saved money. So they ended up saving a little over $1,000 US a year. And so a lot of these foods, most of them, I would say, are very affordable because, they're basic ingredients, they're simply prepared, and generally delicious. There's also all that non-nutrient value. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, along with all these foods being better for our brains and full of all kinds of nutrients, what about, as you mentioned, even if it's cooking dinner or cooking for yourself or your family a couple times a week, what does that do for us?
Well, that's so funny. I just wrote a newsletter about this yesterday, and I was trying to figure out what to say in this time. And no one needs to know like one other account of what quarantine life is like. But I have actually really noticed that because I'm not rushing before dinner because I had to be somewhere, and I'm not rushing after, and I'm having really long leisurely conversations with my family, I am feeling healthier, honestly, than I ever have. And I always cook all the time, but now I'm not eating at restaurants at all. I'm cooking all of my food from scratch. And I think it really does matter just putting value into the act of sitting down and having a meal. And Drew and I talk a lot about nutrients too. Like we want you to get your DHA and your EPA and your vitamin A, but actually what we want is you to eat the whole foods that these things contain. And there's a big difference in that, because I believe that with the Mediterranean diet especially, there's a synergy going on between the foods, which are mostly plant rich, and the olive oil and that small amount of red wine. And all of those things help get the phytonutrients more well absorbed into the body. So it's really not just, you know, getting your nutrients here and there by reading packages that are fortified with that sort of thing. It's really a whole food movement.
Yeah, and I love what you said earlier. I mean, I think we're all susceptible to this, where it's like, oh, just a little more magnesium powder, and I'm going to sleep great, and a little, you know, if I take this supplement or that supplement. I think we like that, particularly Americans, I think, like to take pills. And I think it's where it's very important to be intentional and think about the food as medicine and really treat it that way and honor it that way. And we've got a lot of questions, and everyone, thank you so much for all of your attention. I wanted to make sure to get through them. So we're going to do like a power few minutes here. There's a question about the oven temperature, and all of the recipes are available. You can also check them out on Dr. Annie Fenn's website, Brain Health Kitchen, and at the Aspen Brain Institute. And then going through, there are a couple of questions. What kind of exercises do you recommend? I'm going to answer for Annie. She recommends hardcore skiing, hardcore hiking, being in the mountains, and trudging through deep snow. And so does the Aspen Brain Institute. It's just all about snow for those people. Now, myself, being a Midwesterner, not there to
He's muted.
week, or whether you're riding your bike, you know, getting into the details of which exercise is better. I think it, for me, is a little bit like the leafy green argument, like is Swiss chard better than kale? It's like, what's important is he's eating leafy greens. Do you have an opinion besides your snow loving? I guess you have a whole summer of sports too, so it's not just snow, but.
Well, there's sports like that, and then there's sports like huckleberry picking and morel hunting, which are just more gradual and more joyous about being outside in nature.
I know, I've been farming. I don't think that counts when I'm exhausted, my body's sore. And so I think the point is move with, you know, a real enjoyment of your body.
Alzheimer's prevention, you should be getting 30 minutes a day of some sort of activity where you're actually just moving enough to have your heart rate up. There's
100 minutes a week. Researchers have shown that 9% of depression in the world was just disappear if every adult exercised for 100 minutes a week. So you can use all those numbers to motivate you, but then there's just the common sense we all know. You move and you feel better, especially dancing. Do you use organic, Annie, Fenn, organic girl, yeah or nay?
Sometimes. I go by the environmental working group's guidelines every year, and it changes. There's the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. And honestly, a lot of the produce I buy at the farmer's market where I live is conventional produce because the farmers are not certified organic. But I talk to them and I ask them, you know, do you spray your tomatoes? What are you spraying them with? And so I get a sense that even though these tomatoes are not certified organic, that there's a lot of caretaking, that there's no pesticides in my food. If I don't know where it comes from, I choose organic as much as I can, because pesticide residue on foods can also create oxidative stress in the brain. And so we want to really shield our brains from as much pesticide exposure as we can.
I kind of think about it as levels. When I meet people and they're not eating plants, I just want them to eat plants. I think the benefit of eating plants outweighs the negatives of you know, toxins and problems in conventionally grown produce. And a lot of conventionally produce is fine, as Annie says. Look at the environmental working group. And I think especially now during COVID, I mean, I don't have much organic produce available, but I'm still, you know, feeding the kids lots. The other is to use frozen vegetables, especially organic. Frozen organic blueberries, much better deal, especially in the winter. Feta cheese, you know, I think feta cheese is a great cheese. I think it also because it's a different, it's sheep's cheese, it's sheep's milk. And so it's just a different, I just like diversity within all food groups, whether that's dairy, whether that's your greens. And so it also adds a nice flavor profile. And also feta, I know it's in goat cheeses, and I believe a little bit in feta. You get these capric fats, which are these saturated fats, but they're medium chained. And so they have very different health attributes than the saturated fats that tend to cause, or at least link to, heart disease. And so that's my sense about feta.
Here's my take on cheese. I probably eat more than an ounce a week as per the Mind Diet study. I probably eat cheese more like a European, but I choose very flavorful cheeses. Like feta is very salty and it can really flavor a dish. It's also lower in saturated fat. like Parmesan and Pecorino and things like that. What I avoid is the big bag of shredded cheddar that, you know, you put on everything. I avoid eating cheese in restaurants. And I try to get high quality cheese and eat small amounts of it.
I think it's a lot like meat and even, you know, vegetables. Like if you've got local, you know, dairies that are making cheese, you know, it's just, I love exploring those, supporting those, and learning about those, because you're just going to get such a high quality product. All right, we are here. Does it harm the nutrients in vegetables by cooking, especially in vegetable soup? The longer you cook vegetables, the more you're going to degrade heat labile or heat sensitive nutrients like folic acid, folate, and then some of the special phytonutrients like the anthocyanins. My sense is that, you know, if you only ate really, really cooked vegetables, you still get plenty of nutrients. But it's where, and it relates to the next question about the temperature for olive oil and sauteing, and I'll give my answer, then I want to hear the real pro Annie's answer. But I try to keep the temperatures lower on things. And for a thing like a stew where it's like a long, low and slow cook, that's great. I'm going to have lots of veggies, lots of beans in there, you know, so, but of course there is going to be a little reduction in some of the nutrients. Some of them are more liberated, like the minerals. The more you cook down something, the more the minerals, which are often bound tightly inside proteins, get liberated. And so this is why we recommend in our clinic a real mix of great cooked and slow cooked, lower temperature cooked foods and raw foods. They're both a really important part. You get a kind of, again, diversity of those phytonutrients, diversity of vitamins and minerals in terms of what you have most access to.
Annie and yes, I want to, and Dr. Drew, I want to ask a couple that came in after those questions. May I interrupt? Annie, what we're asking, what about coffee? Is coffee good for brain health?
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics. Coffee is a food that is inherently very rich in antioxidants. You take a cup of black coffee, there's over 300 antioxidants in that cup of coffee. But what we put in our coffee is often what makes it a brain unhealthy drink. Sugar, sweet artificial sweeteners, creamers that have omega-6 fatty acids or trans fats in them. There's a large body of data about drinking coffee, mostly comes from Europe and Norwegian countries, where people can drink up to 5 cups of coffee a day, and it's associated with longevity, less dementia, better cognitive function as they get older, and a lower risk of death, if you want a real endpoint. So I think coffee is good for you. I think the things we put in it are not. I used to be a cream and sugar girl all through medical school, all through my medical career, and I trained myself to go off the sugar and go off the cream, and now I'm enjoying coffee more than I ever have.
Drew, I had a question for you. When we talked earlier, you said that the best way to beat Alzheimer's is to beat depression. Could you say a little more about that, and Annie as well, if she cares to?
Well, sure. That untreated mental health disorders like depression, I'd also put anxiety in there, although the data is stronger for depression. They're correlated with a much greater risk of diseases like Alzheimer's disease, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia. And you can understand why, as individuals struggle with depression, and especially untreated depression, which most depression in America is untreated. You know, it's bad if you think of depression not just as, you know, either something we don't understand or a serotonin problem. And you think about it much more as a nuanced systems issue around brain circuitry, inflammation, sort of a genetic mismatch with the environment. You know, some of those factors are really modifiable. And so that same inflammation that Annie's talking about that drives dementia, you know, what does that look like when you're 35? It looks like clinical depression and anxiety. It looks like brain fog. If you talk to the experts in this and they say, you know, what gets shut down when the brain is inflamed? It's the anxiety circuits get turned up, cognitive circuits start to have challenges. So we experience that as brain fog, and we get a little anhedonic and listless, which looks like depression, or how we describe depression. So that's why treating depression is going to help you beat dementia every single time.
Any comment on that?
Yeah, I'll just make a slight side comment about when I was practicing menopausal medicine, and I spent 8 years talking to women on a day-to-day basis about their symptoms going through menopause. And they described a lot of the symptoms of depression secondary to the hormonal fluctuations they were experiencing. Back then, we didn't even have the term brain fog. but that's exactly what it was. And now we know that the changing levels in estrogen and progesterone around the time of menopause change the way your brain metabolizes glucose. So women at menopause are actually more vulnerable to starting that process of inflammation that leads to Alzheimer's disease later, depending on their symptom makeup and their risk factors. So all I mean to say is that if you're having a difficult time with menopause, go see someone about it and get some help. Like Drew said, it's not always depression, but these things are often really treatable, and they can have impact later in life when it comes to depression, anxiety, and also Alzheimer's disease.
Annie, would that mean that women might be needing to eat some slightly different foods than men if these things affect women differently than men? Is there any talk of that?
There is some talk of that. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, in her book Brain Food, she talks about, in her new book XX Brain, is about women specifically. She talks about consuming a lot of foods that are rich in plant estrogens so that you even out these hormonal fluctuations around menopause and have less symptoms, and also support your brain more so you don't have that, that combative decrease in glucose metabolism that is really bad for your brain. A lot of this stuff still hasn't been studied, but it's being looked into.
It's interesting. Now, Drew, you told me recently that you were either specializing or having a special group on male mental health, which is an undone subject. Tell me if that's telling you anything about men needing to eat differently, act differently, know differently how they are susceptible to certain things in anxiety and depression different from women.
Thank you, Glenda. I think it's inspired in part by Dr. Lisa Mosconi's work focusing on the female brain, her new book, The XX Brain, and really in my own practice and in my own life, being a man myself, of just realizing that mental health issues in men are quite prevalent, really undertreated and underdiagnosed. Substance use disorder, the lifetime prevalence for men, which is the way that we talk about addiction now, substance use disorders. Lifetime prevalence is about 49% for men. So, depression doesn't really, in my clinical experience, look the same in men as it does in women. And then we think about eating habits in men. What do men eat for? They eat lots of protein when they're working out. A lot of times don't have cooking skills. A lot of times aren't involved, excuse me, in the very rewarding aspect of family life. At least I find it pretty rewarding, and I think a lot of guys do, of doing more than just foraging, but also helping and cooking and nourishing your family and kids. So I think there's a lot to male mental health that we want to open up the conversation, especially when we think about mental health around male people of color, men of color. Just, there's not a lot of treatment, and I think and not a lot of role models. And I really think that's shifting radically. So Men's Health Magazine has been hosting me every Friday, doing what's called a Friday session. And I've been interviewing and kind of giving a little mini session to men. We've done, I think, 5 men, including the editor of Men's Health, Bazzi, some really prominent musicians, Sam Lansky, and talking about their mental health, how they take care of it, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, challenges they're having, and then trying to give them some helpful psychiatric counsel or help, just in some ways to model and normalize that's how men are their healthiest, when we take care of our mental health.
That you are getting men to share is really fantastic.
Thank you, Glenda. Online streaming, it's a little uncomfortable sometimes. It's just the two of us, and you realize it's a public session, but I hope I don't get in trouble with HIPAA laws, and I hope I'm really thankful to Men's Health for hosting that, but I hope it does what I think we're all hoping to do in the brain health world and in the mental health world.
Well, I have just a couple more. Do we have time? Everybody, do we have a little more time? I've got one question about, I don't know if you've done this already, Annie, about the difference between extra virgin oil, olive oil, and I guess regular olive oil.
Yes, actually. And that link that we'll be sending you, the Brain Health Kitchen Guide to Cooking Oils, I have a lot of information there that will help you buy a high quality olive oil and also try to avoid a fraudulent one. But I recommend extra virgin olive oil over plain olive oil, which is called pure. It's really an inferior product. It's not really the same thing. So you should be using only extra virgin olive oil in your kitchen. And I categorize it two ways. There's high-end extra virgin olive oils and there's everyday ones. This is an example of an everyday olive oil. It's not that expensive. It should be around $10 a bottle. It should have a harvest date on the back, and that is the date that the grapes were picked. There's a best by date, which you should not look at because that is clearly 2 to 3 years after the harvest date. By then, most of the polyphenols in this olive oil will have dissipated. So you want a fresh product in a dark bottle, preferably glass or tin. You want to check the date. If it doesn't have a date, I probably wouldn't buy it. There's good supermarket brands are inexpensive, and these are the ones I cook with. The high-end olive oils, those are the ones I drizzle on my food. I don't want to cook it because it's very heat sensitive, and you don't want to damage the healthy fats and the polyphenols in the process. You can cook with this olive oil.
Annie?
Low, like Drew was saying, in the Brain Health Kitchen, the way to cook, the brain-friendly cooking techniques are less direct heat, less high heat, less frying, less searing. We like to saute things gently. We like to steam things like in paper, like I just showed you. We like to grill, but also indirect heat. And we don't like to get grill marks on things because there's substances in those grill marks that are highly inflammatory to the blood vessels in the brain.
Annie, do you use organic stevia as a sweetener in either baked goods or coffee or whatever?
Yeah, and I'm not a good person to ask. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I haven't seen any data that shows that it's harmful, like other artificial sweeteners are associated with stroke and dementia. But I tend not to use any added sweeteners like that in my cooking. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it either.
Okay, maybe last one. What about oat milk? What do you think about oat milk?
Oat milk is great. I think anytime you can shift your fat profile from a fat-rich dairy product that you're consuming on a regular basis, day in and day out, to one that's more monounsaturated and unsaturated fat, I think that's a win for brain health. Oat milk isn't particularly high in nutrients. I mean, oats are great. They're high in fiber. They have vitamin E and some other things. I prefer almond milk. I prefer cashew milk. I make it very easily at home. It's a lot cheaper than buying it at the grocery store. And it tastes a lot better too.
I'd like to have a lesson on that sometime because I haven't figured that one out. I have one last question, maybe for both of you. Just something I've been reading. It says even mild stress impairs the prefrontal cortex. So it seems that we're all suffering from something, or many of us are suffering from something that a certain gentleman is calling the collective trauma of COVID. And he's asking for a collective resilience in response. I wanted to ask both of you if this is possible. Does that sound right, Drew? Collective trauma? Is there such a thing as collective trauma of COVID?
Yes, I think there's a collective trauma both of COVID and of the racial injustice that's been going on and so prominent. I think those two things together actually have a synergistic effect on stress. That you know, one, we were already really worn down, already dealing with a lot of anxiety as we were thinking of how to transition from quarantine, and then we've had this huge outpouring of emotion, violence, and just tragedy. And so we're sharing that together. Collective traumas are challenging in lots of ways. One, we tend to amplify certain parts of the trauma and sometimes minimize other aspects. Also, lots of people, we all process this differently. Some people are kind of numbing and dissociating. Other people are getting, you know, agitated and anxious and not sleeping. And so it's, you know, the one part of COVID that has been, it's given me a lot, well, there are a lot of parts, but they've given me some hope. But one part certainly has been that people are, you know, with collective trauma, this notion of a collective response, that everyone's talking about mental health now. Everyone talking about stress. We're all talking about race and race relations. We're all talking about what we can do. At least that's what we should be talking about. And so certainly collective trauma goes with collective resilience because, you know, as we feel traumatized together, hopefully more and more, we also feel the coming together of our, you know, communities, families, support networks, and states and country, hopefully.
Well, Annie, comment? I mean, it's a big question, and I think you
Glad
Train
you're
yourself, Drew.
reassuring to know that it's something that we're all going through together, and there's some benefit to that as well. The only thing I have to add is my brownies are done. If you want to take a
Let's
look.
see. Let's see. Oh, they're beautiful. I
How
can't
do I
wait.
turn the smell on? Where's my button for this nose that I click on here?
Hey, you guys, Annie and Drew, thank you so much for the great presentation, the great questions, the great discussion. We've gone overboard, but all the people, especially from Europe, who are up very late, wanted to keep going. So you guys were a big hit. Thank you so much. Thanks to the audience for lots of great questions. And thanks to our sponsors, Lugano Diamonds and Alpine Bank. And I want to remind everyone about the next session, which will feature Bob Roth and his presentation on transcendental meditation and the brain. Next Monday, June 8th at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, a little bit different hour. You can register on our website, www.aspenbraininstitute.org. If all of you or some of you have 10 to 20 seconds, we're going to throw up 2 poll questions, 2 survey questions. If you have time to answer it, we would appreciate it so much. Again, thank you to these outstanding speakers and presenters. Ciao, everyone. Ciao.